Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a quick minute to let you know that we've launched our Patreon site and that you can now become a supporter of the show. The awards in there include artist features on our website and shout outs on the show, as well as open invitations to join fellow patrons in our roundtable discussion episodes. So if you think you might be interested, please take a look at the link in the description or just go to patreon.com/atpercussion, so /AT percussion. Okay, thanks for listening.
All right, hi everyone. Welcome to your episode 251 of the At Percussion podcast. I am Ben Charles, and with me as always are Ksenija Komljenović.
Hey everyone.
And Casey Cangelosi.
Hey everybody.
Today is September 6th, and we are releasing this episode on October 1st. And Casey, I believe you are going to tell us what happened on October 1st in history, as well as give us a little PSA here.
Yeah, we better do this public service announcement first. So just check this out. If you're entering like a composition contest and you're going to plagiarize someone else's composition and you're going to like put your own name on their work, listen, the world is a crazy enough place that something can happen such that the judge of said composition contest could actually be the composer you're ripping off. So that composer and judge literally looked at this entry and said, wait a minute, I wrote this. And, don't do that. That's like so dumb. And I'm not going to name names or anything, but it's important that people know this. And so if you're, young and thinking, oh, I got to get ahead and I got to get out there and I got to do something that'd be good for my career, no reward or award or prize is worth that. It just, the deficits from that will be far, far greater than what the reward might have been, and you will definitely be found out quickly. So I thought that was just too hilarious not to share.
Yeah, this does sound oddly specific, and if you're wondering, it is something that Casey recently heard about someone doing, and it wasn't one of Casey's works, and like we said, we're not naming any names here. But just additionally, I wanted to add that if you do use something without the composer's permission, even if it makes it through the contest, ultimately, I mean, if it were to get published, obviously issues would arise. And a very famous example of this is John Serry wrote a piece called, I think it's just called West Side Suite for Lee Howard Stevens for solo marimba. And he used themes from Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story. And it was a very challenging work. Lee Howard Stevens learned it. And then there was like a letter from a lawyer involved, and no one can play this work anymore. And it was actually an original work. He was just using the themes from West Side Story. It's not like he just ripped off, some pre-existing suite and arranged it for marimba. But problematic nonetheless. So yeah, just make sure you're
well, and that's far less egregious than this. This is literally just like, I might change a couple of notes and like a measure or two and then just put my name on it.
Yeah, and it's funny. William Mersch has this organization called New Music Marimba, and they've been behind commissioning, I don't know, probably hundreds of marimba pieces that you've heard of. He said there's a clause now, and they call it the John Serry clause in the contract that says you will not use another composer's work without their explicit permission, because you can't do that. It's just, the piece is worthless if it can't be performed. So there you go.
There you go. Well, also today, I've got another birthday for y'all, maybe a lesser-known composer. She's certainly a very known composer, but maybe less so to percussionists specifically, because she just doesn't have a ton of percussion rep. But on October 1st, we got the birthday of Pozzi Escot. That's Pozzi Escot, Escot. She was born in 1933. She's from Peru. She studied at Juilliard, and she's authored a book called The Poetics of Simple Mathematics in Music, and she's also co-authored something called Sonic Design, The Nature of Sound in Music, and beginning in 1980, she's the editor-in-chief of a self-published music journal called Sonus. So she's written more than 30 articles, mostly published on her own journal, in her own journal, and they develop and discuss the relationships between music and mathematics. She starts teaching at NEC in 1964, and she's won McDowell Fellowships, 1962 straight through 1965. And I just wanted to read a little bit about her from a book called Women in World History, a biographical encyclopedia. And this author is John Haag, Haag. And he says by 1960, she was so much in demand that she wrote music only on commission. Although Escot quickly received great acclaim in the musical world, she refused to sacrifice her standards in order to have her works performed. For example, when she was commissioned by the government of Venezuela to write an orchestral composition for the 400th anniversary of the city of Caracas, she did not score for the traditional symphony orchestra. She says, as a 20th century composer, I feel that orchestras are obsolete, for they represent the culture of 100 years ago, and they do not fulfill the needs of our own culture today. Sands, the work written for this celebration, is scored for saxophones, electric guitar, bass drums, plural, violins, and basses. So anyway, a composer you may not have known about. It was her birthday today.
What, that work was called Sands, you said?
Yeah, sands, like
yeah.
sand.
Oh, Sands.
Sands. Oh.
Sands. Yeah, sands, like desert. Yeah, I could not find a recording of it. I could not find a shred of evidence of its existence.
Oh, man.
I did a little bit of research on her, and of course I went into a rabbit hole of looking at probably some middle schoolers' Prezi presentation, which literally said she co-authored everything with her husband, never won any awards.
That's not correct.
That's not correct. But just to say, don't go in there. Don't just copy a middle schooler's Prezi into your own dissertation, people. Don't trust everything that's out there on the internet. Double check everything.
Ksenia is outing the podcast right now.
I have to say I was shocked at how little was out there about her, at least online. I mean, and I looked for her books. I mean, her books are hard to get. I mean, it sounds interesting. Yeah, I was just kind of shocked. She's been a professor at New England Conservatory, since 1964. She's emeritus now. But I mean, geez, that's a long career. And I don't know, and maybe she's one of those composers who kind of missed the internet wave. I know we've talked about percussionists like that over the years, that if you didn't kind of catch the internet wave when it came up, it's hard to get back on later. But I was just kind of shocked, like why can't I find more about her?
Yeah, agreed.
Very cool. Thanks so much for sharing, Casey.
You betcha.
Our guest today is Meagan Gillis. Meagan is the principal timpanist of the Spokane Symphony and Maryland Symphony Orchestra, and she's also performed with the Auckland Philharmonia, Cleveland Orchestra, Columbus Symphony, among others. And she's also performed with the contemporary jug band Bones Jugs and transatlantic dance music group Hess Is More. So welcome to the podcast, Meagan Gillis.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Well, Meagan, when I was reading your bio, I saw this lines about Bones Jugs, and I had something in my mind. I was like, I know that name. Where do I know that name? And I very quickly realized I actually went to University of Wisconsin, who is sort of behind that group, and I saw it, and I researched, and I found some recordings of you playing with it. So for the uninitiated, could you tell us, first of all, what is a contemporary jug band, and second of all, what was your involvement with that group?
So you said Cody Jensen, right? It cut out right when you said
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah,
okay.
Everything blinked, but I went to Illinois with Cody Jensen. Yeah.
Yeah. So I in grad school I started busking and doing the xylophone thing just for a summer gig, and Cody had reached out because they had a xylophone. Tim Berg had left the group or whatever, and they needed a xylophone player. And so I jumped in and just kind of trial by fire, learned a bunch of bluegrass, traditional jazz, folk music, intermixed with green rags, which are very much a staple in the percussion repertoire, but they've kind of expanded it to do a little bit of steel pan, a little bit of ragtime, and then everything in between. So, but it's just it's a traditional jazz band, but instead of the traditional instruments, it's we do have a string bass, but then Cody's set is totally very much a Spike Jones trap kit of car horns and noises and stuff. And
yeah, I
and then
saw a
there's
video also.
yeah.
Cody was playing. If anyone's familiar with the instrument bones, it's like literally two. I think it's like femurs from a calf or something like that. You hold
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, shin bones from a cow. But yeah. I guess there's ox bones too. But yeah, all that stuff. And what else? He like brought in conch shell. Like he brought in like the cage, the third construction, like that into like a pan tune. Like they found ways to like intermix the.
If anyone doesn't understand what we're talking about, it's very John Singer is all I can say. If you could imagine what goes on inside John Singer's head, that's what comes out.
Yeah, that's about right. That's about right.
And so how long were you involved with that group?
I was there. I toured full time with them for about a year and a half, and then I moved to Spokane to do orchestra stuff, and they're kind of still doing a little bit here and there, but they've also moved on. The bass player now owns like a venue in Urbana, and Cody's like about to be the mayor of Urbana too. Like he's running the Folk and Roots Festival, and they've kind of taken over the town little by little. So they're doing all kinds of stuff, and we recorded 2 albums. One of all of the, or not all of the, but 5 Green Rags, and then an album of original music that's like kind of in the same style, but with lyrics and all kinds of other stuff as well.
So Meagan, why don't you give us the standard issued COVID update with Spokane Symphony? Like we just kind of have to ask everyone as we're tracking the progress of this thing, what's happening there?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing is happening right now. We got laid off April 1st, and I'm on the orchestra committee, which gives me a little bit more information of what's going on. But basically, right now, Washington State has one of the strictest set of rules on live performances and like large gatherings. Like there's absolutely no room for doing anything right now via like the state mandate. But they are kind of starting to make exceptions, which it's a tough situation because it snowed in September there last year. So like the most safe thing to do is to play outside, but like obviously that window is closing. We canceled the season and are pushing it to next September, but I think everybody's hoping that some small things will happen, maybe, starting in January or March, or I don't know. I'll take what I can get at this point.
Were you literally laid off, or is it furloughed?
Oh, yeah.
Like your positions are gone.
Like furloughed?
Well, I guess. Yeah, I guess you'd call it like furlough, but yeah, it's just we got a letter that's saying, until further notice, like this is where we're at. So
what are some of the things people are doing like in the meantime? This is a conversation that we're kind of continuing on and off with guests, and yeah, they go from everything from like, oh, nothing, people are relaxing, to people are side gigging and teaching as much as possible. What are some of the things that you're finding musicians are doing over there in the meantime?
That's a good question. I think I had heard that somebody got a real estate license. I mean, I haven't kept too much. A lot of people. I think.
Ksenija laughed at that. She thinks real estate is a joke.
I think that's awesome, but that's very oblique gig.
Yeah, it's very much.
I see.
A lot of people teach, which like that's still going on. There's like 3 colleges there that a lot of people are at least adjunct at, and a lot of folks are like kind of this is their retirement gig. Like they've played for there's probably I don't know half a dozen people at least that have been there for 40 years. So like, and one person's been there for 50. So like they're at the end of kind of their long stretch of a orchestral career, and this is just kind of something to keep doing to keep their chops up, or to keep enjoying it and that kind of thing. It's not like they're basically retired in every other sense. So myself, I went back to the East Coast. I actually was accidentally on the East Coast the minute that the country shut down, so I stayed on the East Coast with family and friends, and have just kind of made it work here since I'm relatively familiar with the territory and how to survive. But it seems everybody's kind of it's a mix of like either being on unemployment or like just totally abandoning music altogether and thinking of the next thing. So
well, you seem totally happy. You seem like you're doing great.
What are you gonna do? What a time to be alive.
Good for you. That's awesome. That's
That's-
really great.
I was checking out a lot of your videos, and especially, I mean, watching you play the xylophone is such a pleasure because I mean, I don't know if you folks haven't seen this, you have to go look at Meagan playing the xylophone because she literally stares into the camera and smiles. And it's a little bit of showing off of amazing skills. And also, it's just, you're constantly smiling playing the xylophone, and then it seems like you're that kind of a person because there's so many outtakes and bloopers on your Instagram channel, which are just fantastic. Is this the kind of person you are? Or is xylophone your drug, or what's going on? Why are you smiling so much with the xylophone?
That's a great question. I took myself so painfully seriously when I joined Bones Jugs. I was like, we're making like a living doing music, and like we're good, and like we just, we deserve the credit, and I'm gonna take myself seriously. And that like absolutely didn't work. Like we play the goofiest music, and to like sit up there with a frown on is just like the biggest antithesis of like what like ragtime and the Depression era stuff was. So like I started making fun of myself, and then that like I saw that people liked that more, and I was like, oh well, that's fun to do. Like let me just, I mean, I've played these rags so many times, like let me just find the stuff that makes myself laugh. And then it's mostly like my mom just started laughing at my like bits, and then it snowballed. So yeah, the gimmicks are fun, and they make more money. Like I'm busking right now in Cape Cod this weekend, which is why I'm outdoors. And like here, like everybody hears with their eyes. So like the more you do like shtick and like interact with people, the more they're like, oh, that's really good music, or like, oh, they're playing something that I know, stuff like that. So
More sticks equals better music.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's another busker that plays. He makes more money playing with like a horse mask on, so he hates it. But like whatever. I guess we're going out to make money. May as well
You're
make
doing
more.
real market research there. That's really
mean,
valuable.
Now we know why symphonies are failing.
Yeah. You don't have a giant helmet on or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll have to talk to our development team about some strategies about that. So.
Well, Meagan, I had a question. A while back, we had Casey's friend Jim Benoit on the podcast, and I'm so fascinated because to me, in my practice, like timpani playing is so unique versus snare drumming and two mallet marimba playing, which are sort of similar. But the thing that I found is like with Jim, he does timpani and jazz vibes, and you do, it seems, timpani and like ragtime xylophone. And like the connection I can make is that it involves a lot of ear training and theory on the fly, that sort of thing. And obviously with timpani, you're tuning, and with improvisation, you have to be able to hear what you're playing without getting ahead of time. So how do you feel that timpani and ragtime xylophone meet up? How do they make sense together?
That's a good question. I didn't actually think that they were remotely related, but that is a good point. Like the ear training thing is something that I have done. Like I started percussion relatively late, and like I started lessons relatively late when I got into percussion. But like the ear training thing was something that I did like from being a kid, like wanting to learn how to play like Queen songs or whatever on guitar. So like definitely those things I've worked on constantly, and like even now, like trying to figure out how to improvise new things, and also with timpani, like the intonation bit, as like orchestral music gets harder and harder, especially with movie soundtracks and that kind of thing. Like that's definitely the link, if there is one, of the two things, because I mean technique wise, like xylophone is beyond like way harder on my chops than playing 5/1 a bunch of times in a Brahms piece or whatever. Like that's more of a touch and a like sensitivity thing than xylophone, which is just like raging note fest, 2020 or whatever, whatever year it is.
I wanted to go back. Sorry, I'm really interested in your real world experience of seeing how people react when you're busking, because I think busking is a very, very valuable experience for musicians, young and old, doesn't matter. But I'm really interested, since you've done it so much, is it that we should go to a place like Martha's Vineyard or Aspen to busk, where people have a lot of disposable income, or should we be, is the New York City subway a good idea? Or what have you found? Is there like at peak hours or at night that we should do it? How do you see this?
I've learned a lot over the past years. I did a lot in New York, and I will say, like, if you want to punish yourself a little bit, definitely go to New York in the subway in the summertime, because I've never been more sweaty and more gross and like just risked all of the, you don't know if you're going to make money at any given point. But I had heard that, or I guess I just guessed that Provincetown would be a good place. And here is like very much a lot, it's very expensive to vacation here and stuff like that, and people are very into the arts here. There's tons of shows on a normal year, when there's not a global pandemic. There's shows all over the Strip, and like everybody comes to like enjoy themselves, go to the beach, and then like see entertainment in some form. And a lot of the buskers that play here go to Key West, which is a similar area. It's that, and then with New York, it's like anybody can busk, and it's great if you're living there, but it can be bad sometimes, and especially with like the phone thing. Like people are less, they're interested in like the next Instagram pic that they can get as like a tourist or whatever, or even as like a resident there. Like it's not, the community of like tipping is less popular nowadays. I think in Europe it's still pretty like good, but I've never tried it. I've just heard tale from like student friends of mine. But I haven't tried. I guess I tried LA once, and that was a waste of time. But I'm sure it can be fine. I was like on the Walk of Fame. I had no idea what I was doing, and it just seems like if you're not wearing a Spider-Man costume, like it's they're not there for that. So maybe I should try some sort of Marvel situation. I'm not into the superheroes, but I have heard that there are some popular ones. So maybe that's my next expense.
Usually people who like the Batman soundtrack are not into ragtime usually.
Fair. I do play the rag from the Joker, but no one has clocked that. Like no one knows that it's like it was that from the dance that he does on like the Bronx steps. Everybody goes to the steps, but nobody knows the rag. So where
in Batman is that rag? I don't know if I remember.
No, in the Joker.
In the Joker.
Oh, in the
thing
movie
where he's
Joker.
like, yeah, where he's dancing on the steps.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Ksenija and I got in a fight once if that's actually like a Batman movie or not, because I called. Oh no, maybe that was a student of mine, because I called it the Joker, and they were like, it's called Joker, not the Joker, and then we got in a fight.
I would have gotten with you in a fight for that thing, but it wasn't me.
That would have been you. We could fight about that later.
Yeah, later.
Speaking of busking, I was going to ask, you need a license to busk, right? In most cities, don't you have to get a permit?
Yeah, in some places. Here, it's like very simple. Like you go to the police station. I don't even know if they check. Like I've never been checked for it. In New York, I auditioned for Music Under New York, but there are certain places that like nobody's going to tell you to leave. Or you can go long enough and nobody's going to walk by or whatever, and it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's a fair number of, I think Chicago is pretty strict with permits, and yeah, it definitely depends on city to city, which is not ideal, but but
if you're wearing a Spider-Man outfit, well, you just escape.
Yeah, you get the web and stuff. That's right. What he does, right?
Well, yeah, I thought it'd be important maybe to tell guests, like, do your Googling before you just start, throw a hat on the street and juggle.
Casey, I was going to ask, how's the busking scene in Harrisonburg, Virginia? You going out playing with people stroll in the streets?
It's hot. Yeah, people love that. Yeah.
Tips.
Yeah. I'd try to juggle maybe instead or something.
Do something he's actually good at for a change.
Ooh.
You're vicious.
Sorry, poisonous woman here.
Well, maybe actually, Ksenija, could you tell us, maybe you know, maybe you don't, what like the busking scene in European cities? Is it comparable to the U.S.? Is it better, worse?
I mean, I would know about Serbia, sort of, I guess. There aren't many rules and regulations in general in that country, and if they do exist, they're not there to be followed, but just to be mocked and ignored. So Usually, like if you walk down the main pedestrian street, you will see so many buskers, and they are, I mean, very, very rarely bothered by the police, and never anything fancy. No, I don't know about Croatia, Ben. I've never been to this country.
Yeah,
that you
Ksenija's
think I'm
from it's some B city, Belfast or something. Is that it?
Budapest, Bucharest, some of
Yeah,
those.
one of those.
Yeah, one of those.
Or as Casey eloquently put it, Zagreb.
That's also
Podcast
Croatian.
jokes, instant jokes.
My mission on this podcast is to educate you about that little region in the Balkans. No, but there is nothing, and I know a lot of my friends would go out and you just put a hat down and you play for as long as you like, and it does. People do stop and watch actually, and it's not very Instagrammable there. I think it's good because people are still paying attention with their eyes and not through a lens, which is cool. Yeah.
I did it in Boston once, and I brought a snare drum with like a towel over it, and I just did, speaking of shtick, I just tried to make it stick trick focused, and I made maybe $10, but it took, I was so exhausted. Like I was so, you don't play for hours straight, especially that kind of music, like that type of thing. It's like those recital pieces we practice are, a couple minutes long. And trying it for 2 hours, like I didn't go back. I took my $10 and bought a coffee, and that was about it.
Yeah, I mean, I got asked to play at some old lady's birthday party one time. They asked me to play marimba for an hour at a birthday party, and it's like I've practiced this instrument quite a bit, but what hour-long recital of birthday party rep have I practiced? So I ended up just like mostly reading some slow Bach that, it sounded good, but yeah.
Yep. Well, I was gonna ask Meagan, let's talk about your audition. A lot of people, I mean, so many people out there are just trying so hard to get on the audition circuit. They're trying so hard to win a job like you have. What's the story there? Can you tell us a little about, what your first round was like and your second round, and, what you played in the final round, stuff like that?
Sure. Auditions are a nightmare, and I congratulate everybody for trying. I think it's the most frustrating thing about it is that just every time you never know what to expect. You always have to assume, you just have to go with it if the organization is just not prepared to do a well-run audition, which is entirely possible at all levels. But for my particular one that I won most recently, it was fairly straightforward. I mean, the job doesn't pay that well, so it didn't have a huge turnout, and especially in the middle of the summer, it was also kind of a weird time. It was also a 1 year, which is also a weird time. So they had a 2-round audition. I think there was 16 people there, and they advanced 8 to the semifinal round, and it was behind a screen the whole time. They asked on the list, they asked for 3 solos, which I will be changing that if I ever get out into a different gig. And
3. You said 3.
Yeah, 3 solos.
Wow.
They asked for the Carter March. They asked for a solo of your own choosing, and then for a Vic birth etude, which they didn't ask. They asked for the solo of your choosing in the first round, and then the other 2 they never asked for, which is I made mute specifically for the march, to work in an audition, and I was all pumped about it, and then never again have I touched that piece of work. I did Adele Glue's Etude 29, I think, is a classic, very popular one in auditions, and it's a bop, as they say, and so I've done that one many times, and I think and then they had sight reading in the second round, and they asked me to play Shlomo, which I couldn't. It took me until 20 minutes after the round had happened that I was that's what that was. It was the most random, I think, thing they could have asked.
That's Ernest Bloch, right?
Yeah. We played it at CIM when I was there. It's very, very much klezmery and I don't know, chewy romanticism kind of thing, but also has a lot of that klezmery kind of theme music, Russian Jewish sounding things. But it has some weird cross rhythms, and yeah, anyways, so they picked me, and then I got a 1 year, and the guy who I replaced is now a lawyer. I guess he finished law school at University of Michigan and is doing that. So he's probably in a great position now in the year 2020.
It is always interesting that solo rep for a timpani audition, because obviously timpani is mostly not a solo instrument. It mostly plays in orchestra. But the most interesting one I've heard of those is I think he went for it with his Chicago Symphony audition. Dave Herbert plays Stars and Stripes Forever on timpani. And there is, if you go on YouTube, you can find a recording not of Dave Herbert doing it, but of his arrangement of Stars and Stripes Forever on timpani, and it is wild. That's all I can say.
Oh yeah, I've learned it. It's a bear, and I think somebody tried to do it at the Spokane audition, and it's just like it's definitely impossible to do on drums that you're playing for the first time, which is something that's like, I don't know, maybe. Well, I guess in percussion and timpani, it's like something very unique to our auditions. Is just like sometimes you walk in and you play your first round, and that is the first time you're touching those instruments. And that's a different skill that that I wish that we didn't have to acquire, but is only.
On that note, I was going to say, I mean, not only an instrument you're not familiar with, but you could practice with, ankle action timpani and walk in and their leg action timpani. It's literally an instrument you've never played, perhaps. That's bizarre. And if you walked in to play that arrangement on leg action timpani without practicing that you would definitely lose the audition.
Ben, is now a good time to ask her about the Bartok? Are you going to do that a little later?
Oh yeah, can we talk about the Bartok Sonata? Have you ever played that? Did you play the timpani part? What was your solution for the crash cymbals?
Standard question.
I wasn't going to go there, Casey, but you asked.
I know. No, thank you. Yeah, keeping a record.
Yeah, I think I learned it, but I haven't played it. I saw my teacher do it with Paul Jančić and Mark Domlakis did it, and Paul, he's one of those people that's so good. You just like don't even notice, but like he's not a fast mover, but like that was one time that I'm like, oh, like just like zipped around and got, I guess, a couple crashes. Is it at the end or like somewhere in the middle that you have to like go? Yeah, is it play the other part or something?
For the beginning of the third movement, you have to like play really like kind of small crashes and then immediately go to timpani. It's really, really hard transition. Yeah. I use a hi-hat stand. You can put two cymbals together and you can just use your hand to crash the hi-hat, then go over to the timpani. Casey is asking me about that one all the time.
I throw them to the partner.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah. That makes sense.
Hey, okay. I was going to ask about we were talking about solo rep, and and then Ben was saying like it's kind of tough to think of timpani as a solo recital piece a lot of times. And what's some of your favorite rep? Like if you had to pick some favorites, what would you pick? You mentioned De La Cruz.
Could I so if I run also the obstacle of also concerti, if you have any timpani concerti you like?
I'm gonna throw a controversial opinion out there and say that all of the solo rep for timpani is trash. Like, I love timpani, I love playing it, and I love being in an orchestra, but that is not an instrument that I want to hear played solo. Like,
what do you think's wrong with it? Like, because I mean, I think that is a common opinion. Like, people really struggle with like making that work as a solo instrument. And what do you think a piece could have or have less of, or so on and so forth?
I think the things that work well are things like the rock and roll, or what is it, the Raise the Roof concerto, the Michael Dougherty composition, where it's just like, it's not heavy into the melodic things. Like it's just not perceivable to like a human ear for the first time. Like if you're listening to like notice the melody and like the, I guess you can notice phrasing, but it's mostly rhythm based and like drummy, and those things seem to work. But anything else that's like I don't know, legato or like melodic or harmonic or all those things, like they don't really work. And I think that's what's the issue with timpani as a solo instrument in orchestra. And really, like, I've learned for one of my recitals, I did a 17-minute solo piece by I forget the guy's name. It was It's called Rituals, Bruce something or other. But like I went back and listened to it, and it's like I don't know what notes I'm playing. I know I played them well because I remember being like, oh, that went well. But otherwise, like it just sounds like a bunch of rolls and 16th notes and stuff linked together. And if you're comparing that even to a snare drum solo, like at least with snare drum you have like some variety and discernible like tone qualities that you can synthesize and like take in, whereas with timpani it's like you're a little bit behind on like taking in like what pitches are being played and what like clarity there is, because it's so ringing in a hall, or like there's so many things that are like getting in the way of hearing what's actually going on.
Yeah, I played the Doherty Raise the Roof a little less than a year ago, actually, and you're right. It does work very well in timpani because it's very rhythmic the whole time, and there's a lot of pedaling, but he sort of set it up well so you have only two drums that are pedaling at a time. Basically, one drum is pedaling D and E, the other drum is F and G, and then you have an A on another drum. So you've got this sort of 1 through 5 and D minor all very conveniently in front of you. But I wanted to give a shout out to one other timpani piece that I don't think really ever gets played these days, Toshi Ishinagi's Rhythm Gradation, but it is terribly, terribly engraved to where each drum has its own line instead of being written on like a 5-line staff. But it's super cool, but it just doesn't get played for some reason. It's, I think, maybe a nice alternative to Carter for like a senior recital or graduate recital, something like that. Do you guys know that?
Probably easily renotated, right?
Probably, but no one's done it. But did any of you guys know that piece? It's a cool one.
Heard the name, but I've never played it. I didn't realize it was notated like that either, so I don't think I've laid eyes on it.
Yeah, it's I've thought about playing it, but just looking at it, I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that right now.
I probably saw it in like the Steve Weiss, timpani solo cat, I'm like thumbing through it, and then I went like, wait a minute, I'm in timpani solos, let me get the hell out of here, and I went to snare drum.
Casey, didn't you write a piece for Dave Herbert?
No, he mentioned on our episode that the idea of me.
He
can't afford me though. What does he do? Play for like Chicago or whatever? Dude, I can't.
What's the timpani thing you wrote? It wasn't just timpani, right? But you wrote something with timpani.
I have like a kind of timpani solo multi piece where you like put. It doesn't count because you like put crap on the drums, and the last movement is fairly long, and it is kind of a straight ahead timpani solo, but there's 3 movements ahead of that with like all sorts of stuff. And
well, I remember seeing some recording. I might have been someone else that was like working on it. It was just like pedal up and down constantly. Are they actually notated pitches, or is it just like an effect of raising and lowering the pedal?
I think probably the spot you're talking about is just an effect. Like it's like, hey, you're on this pitch, stretch as high as you can and then rip back down to the same pitch.
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, it's right. I can do that. Yeah. It's all stuff I can do.
Yeah, my ankle works like that. I couldn't hear the pitches. I can move a timpani pedal up and down.
It's a piece I really like that I'm very happy with. It doesn't get played a lot, but it doesn't probably really qualify as just a timpani solo.
Yeah. There's that also. That reminds me. There's that Jean Pichet Steal the Thunder. It's another like timpani and multi. I would say that's even more of a multi piece than a timpani piece, but cool piece.
Cool.
Track.
Do you want me to do my topic now, Ben?
Yeah, sure. So Casey, you had something you were going to talk about that's very relevant, and at least we're not just talking about what are you doing in coronavirus again. It's actually related, but not exactly that. So why don't you tell us about your topic today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know if this will lead into an interesting conversation or not, so fingers crossed. But a lot of times thanks, Ksenija, appreciate that. A lot of times our our listeners, they want to know what to do like additionally in their practice, right? And they always say like, okay, I understand I got to get good. That's a very like aimable and tangible target, but they also want to know like, what else do I need to do for my upcoming like hopes for a job or orchestra job or whatever it might be. And that usually leads us into some kind of conversation about networking and being a good peer, being a good colleague. And something we haven't really talked about much though is like, what about your like deep ingrained friendships that you have with fellow artists? And so, yeah, networking is like, a very tangible and countable kind of result. I got this gig, or I got recommended for this thing, or, oh, through networking, I got this recommendation. But like, what about like the value of your really, really close friends? And just kind of this curiosity, I bumped into a little article called Why Creatives Need Creative Friends. Musings on a John Singer Sargent exhibit at the Met by Nicole Bianchi. So she's a writer and an author, and she's got a bunch of cool little blog posts that I bumped into. But one of them, she talks about this visit to the Metropolitan Art Museum in New York with a buddy. And they see an exhibit by this American painter named John Singer Sargent, who I guess is 1856 to 1925. And they notice how many of his paintings have fellow artists or writers portrayed in them. And so her and her friend ask each other, do you think that he just came from a well-connected high society family and that's why he had so many impressive friends? Or do you think that creative and talented people are like actually drawn to each other? Does talent attract talent? Does artistry attract other artists? So surrounding yourself with other artists who are passionate about the same things you are, like, does that contribute artistic, flourishing inside of yourself? And what's the benefit to those things? And she kind of just leaves it there. I mean, she doesn't cite any conclusion or anything really, really important. But I know, like, I've got, my like network of people, but then you've also got like your really, really close friends who you get a lot of other things from them. So I thought I would just ask, what do you guys think about that? Did that stir up any ideas? We know a lot of famous pairs in music, like Coco Chanel and Stravinsky, Harrison and Cage. My favorite duo, just because I think the story is so interesting, Hedy Lamarr and Antiel. Right, Ballet Mécanique, and the whole thing with the piano rolls and the torpedo guidance system that she coins, and he helps her figure out the missing piece too. And it's just it's such a neat thing. So I don't know, do you guys have any benefit you feel like you get from your close friends versus just your like regular network?
So many. That's why I keep them close, is because there are so many benefits. I just want to milk them till they're all gone. No, just kidding. You can't hear everybody is laughing. Thank
I'm
you,
laughing.
podcast.
I'm laughing.
Ha, that was funny. No, I mean, of course, I think when I look back on my life and, seeing the friendships that I've made, that I still have, that I've made, at the beginning of high school, these are the people who have shaped me, which is very true. And every professor always says, you learn a lot more from your peers than you do from me, because you spend a lot more time with them. And then those really deep relationships, we share so many values, and we've gone through so many phases in our lives together that certainly they influence me greatly. And because most of them are artists, I get to bounce ideas off of them, and I get to have sort of a parameter of, oh, wow, look at this friend that's doing this really cool thing. Let me try to keep up with them, or have a buddy to do something together, or whatever. So I think our environments shape us greatly. Yeah.
Sure. And I have to say, I don't know if I necessarily agree with the premise she presents that like this is always positive, because of course artistic friends can be really combative. They can be, really, really competitive, and they can repel each other. I talked about the artist Henry Darger, who just worked alone in his apartment, total recluse. Nobody knew he was making any of his art. And, now he's very, very well known. He didn't benefit from any of that during his lifetime. But yeah, I mean, being alone was probably super, super important for how he did his work. And I don't know if you all remember being a student and maybe you went to PASIC for the first time with your studio, and I don't know about y'all, but like half the studio came back just pumped and like ready to practice all day, every day. The other half of the studio came back totally bummed out and thinking like just despair and abandon all hope. There's no way I'm going to be this good at percussion. Ben, you want to like, there's no way I'm going to be able to achieve, any measurable amount of all that's out there and all that I need to do. And I have to say about PASIC, I think, because sometimes people doing the same thing, it repels each other. PASIC is so fun because it's so hard to bump into someone who's doing like exactly what you're doing. Percussion is just too broad for that. It's too wide, you know. Like I mean, it's there's so few people that I think are built just like I am. Like, oh yeah, they're doing everything I am. So I think it's easier for us to be friends in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I could ramble for a very, very long period about this. And I think that it definitely comes down to different personality types and different situations where it can be a positive or a negative. I remember when YouTube came out around 2006, 7, something like that. It was the first time that I saw anyone play percussion like I did, but that did not go to my school. And I've said this on the podcast before, but I came across Casey's YouTube channel. And Casey, I was a graduate student at that point and had these, incredibly fast hands. And I just remember the thought in my mind was like, because I didn't know who Casey was. I was like, oh, does everyone that I don't know play like this? And thank God they don't. But that was like a revelation for me. Like, oh God, I need to be able to keep up with this guy. But no, one of my favorite things about undergrad was there was a semester, my buddy Mike Yip, who's now a doctor. Mike Yip and I had drum set practice rooms across the hall from each other at UNT, and we lived near each other, and we both had drum set lessons on Friday mornings. So we'd be up there every Thursday until midnight cramming in practice, and at some point we would share ideas and play for each other. And every Friday morning he would give me a ride over to campus, and we would have our drum set lessons back to back. It was just a wonderful, friendship that I learned so much from. But Casey was mentioning pairings earlier, and I wanted to mention one other interesting pairing. Casey mentioned John Cage and Lou Harrison, but do you guys know about John Cage and John Lennon?
No.
So
no, those are two different bands, Ben.
Yeah, they were neighbors in New York City.
What?
And they would talk art, and obviously John Lennon was a pop artist and John Cage is not, but Yoko Ono was very much in the same vein as John Cage as far as her artistic vision, and they would compare notes. And also John Lennon was being surveilled by the FBI or CIA, one of the two, for being a communist. And so when John Lennon needed to use the phone, he would walk across the street to John Cage's house and use John Cage's phone. So,
right.
Really,
I remember the phone. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
But Megan, you, I think, went to undergrad with someone by the name of Carly. Did you guys bounce ideas off of each other? And
that's a great question. I kind of was a dingus in undergrad, but we did overlap for 3 years, and we both did music ed, and it was a very small studio when we were there. So like, it was a small community. I wasn't a huge practicer until kind of my senior year when I studied with the teacher that I had been wanting to study with my entire undergraduate career. And then I finally kind of got the ball rolling there. There was another person that went to Maryland who I connected with kind of after we both graduated, Keith Williams, who plays in Fort Worth. And we've kind of stayed in touch and just kind of pushed each other on the orchestral spectrum in terms of like getting ready for auditions or like staying active in like that orchestral chops community. But through busking, I've actually gotten a lot of networking opportunities. I played with Hesses Moore, which is a group, and I met this guy who is like movie soundtrack producer, like commercial music producer, but also does this like really cool ensemble thing where he basically takes what EDM kind of is and puts acoustic instruments to it and kind of composes that way. But I met him in the Green Market at Union Square in New York, and he was just like, I have a studio down the street. Do you want to come by later and like play some stuff? And I had a similar experience with a great comedian who plays, who's a really popular like alternative comic, but he also is a writer and actor on Amy Sedaris' show. If you're familiar with, anyone listening is familiar with Amy Sedaris, Strangers with Candy, or At Home with Amy Sedaris, which is now on. He's a writer on that, and plays Chassie Tucker, sassy neighbor. Anyways, but I met him. He like wrote me a nice note in my like box, and like got to collaborate with him through that. So like definitely like doing something and just like putting myself out there, because I'm relatively introverted, has been like my way of like sort of connecting with other people is just like through playing music physically in front of people and being like, I'm available. And meeting friends that way has been kind of my method of operation of sorts.
That's awesome. And if you ever get to meet Amy and through her brother David, could you please introduce me to him? Because I love his writing.
My God.
He's hilarious. It's just like amazing. But I was going to ask, it's really interesting that you said that you are an introvert, because definitely your performance seems to be so extroverted. You are so open. Could you give us a little piece of advice? Was it a process for you? What do we say to our students who say, well, I'm introverted. I don't want to put up a show or whatever. I just feel uncomfortable around humans staring at me. What do we do?
Well, that was kind of my solution is like, when I started, or before I started busking, I was like, I have performance anxiety. Like I have nerves. I don't like introducing myself to like random strangers. Like, let me just go out and play some music and maybe they'll introduce themselves to me and I can like handle that much at least. And from there start a conversation, because they're talking about, I don't have to talk about myself. I can just show them what I do, in that sense. But like, obviously, like I had a lot, like I took a xylophone from CIM. They didn't know that I took, and I took it on a bus to New York. Like the anxiety levels were at an all-time high, but it worked. Like I guess it paid off in some way. So there's definitely a price for doing those things, but it obviously like pays off tenfold with like the opportunities that you can get from things. There's no guarantees, but for someone like me who doesn't like being like, oh, I'm really good at this, it worked in being a shower, not teller sort of situation.
Well, I just had an interesting perspective on this to add. If you listen to the podcast, you may very well think that I'm an extrovert, but if you've ever shared an awkward elevator ride with me at PASIC, you'll know that I'm definitely an introvert. But
yes.
I heard this thing that made so much sense to me. And you would think of a performer up on stage as wanting to be an extrovert and being loud and sharing what they have to offer. But actually, if you think about it, if there's a soloist on stage and there's a crowd in the audience, the stage is actually a very solitary, lonely experience. And there's this thing I've heard that introverts like being a soloist on stage and extroverts like playing in an orchestra because you're a part of a large group. So I don't think that being a performer necessarily means introverted or extroverted. I think it's whether you prefer to perform alone or in a group of people that can determine which one you fall into. My 2 cents on it. But yeah, also if I'm ever in the elevator with anyone at PASIC, I'm sorry, I'm just awkward in person.
Oh, it's the worst. How many elevators? I always take the stairs. Like Ben's here, I'm taking the stairs.
Actually, if I can just share a funny little anecdote, not about that, but elevators at PASIC. When I was in undergrad, we played at PASIC, and there was this guy Sam, and we were on like the 18th floor of a hotel or something like that. And I don't know why, just being an idiot, completely joking. I was like, I'll race you to the bottom. So I like run down the stairs and Sam gets in the elevator and I won. I got there first and I was all happy. I'm like huffing and puffing in front of the elevator. And then the doors open and I see Sam and I see Gordon Stout. And Sam turns to Gordon and goes, it was very nice to talk to you. And he walks out. I was like, so not that I would have talked to Gordon in the elevator at that point in my life anyway, but yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. My original teacher from Utah, Dennis Griffin, shared an elevator ride with John Cage. Yeah, and I guess he got some cool insight that we don't always hear about. But
Wow.
hey, we do
Meagan.
have one. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna ask Meagan, who was the coolest person that you missed an elevator ride with, or had one with?
Well, I don't know about elevators. The first time I finished busking, I ended up right behind Jesse Tyler Ferguson in a line to go like get tickets or something, and that was just like a weird like but I was like so embarrassed because I had like $1 bills falling out of my pocket that I usually just try and run and hide at that point.
Plus you had the horse head on, so
yeah,
Our buddy Greg Reinhardt just asked, how did you get into timpani playing out of, I assume you started in percussion just like we all do, but then at some point you zeroed in on timpani. How did that happen and where'd that interest come from?
My teacher basically was like, hey, you could be a timpanist. And I was like, well, that's nice. Like, let me try that a little bit more. So I think just the confidence from like having someone be like, oh, you're doing well at this, was all that was needed. So just kind of spiraled from there.
Well, on that note, yeah, you might have just sort of answered this question already, but we had several episodes ago John Tafoya on the podcast, and he talked about growing up in the St. Louis area, and I can't remember the timpanist of the St. Louis Symphony at the time. I can't remember his name, but John basically said, he said there were so many of us, so many timpanists that watched him play and were so inspired by his playing, and so many of us are successful these days. And I know John Haas is also from St. Louis area. I'm sure that was a similar role model for him. Did you have any, or I guess I could just ask, who is your timpani role model? And if it was John Tafoya at the beginning, could you tell us what inspired you about him?
I mean, well, not to like, obviously I'm sure like John is a great timpanist. I was not great about like going to see concerts and stuff in undergrad, and I didn't really get a concept for like playing timpani until the end of undergrad. So I didn't study with him. I studied almost exclusively with Komljenović, and I've taken a lesson with like Meagan Gillis, with Ed Stefan, with like a ton of other players who are all great. I would say Komljenović is definitely up there, and Cloyd Duff, and Dave Herbert. Really, I've taken a few lessons with him as well. But I love those players, and it really, it all depends on the orchestra. I think that matters more, the way the timpanist interacts with an orchestra and the way that they like, put together moments. There's quiet moments and then there's big moments, both which can involve timpani pretty heavily. And the way those things are balanced is really what's powerful, I guess, to listen to. So I guess, I guess the Cleveland style is pretty much my goal as a player, but when it it's obviously depends piece to piece what things are the most compelling, I guess.
On that note, also I was going to ask, sorry, like generic question, but what's your like favorite timpani moment in an orchestra, like Mahler 5 or something?
That's a good one. Okay, I do love. Okay, there's a moment. It's always like usually just we're like truly playing the bridesmaid to like somebody else's like big solo moment. It's like Mahler 5 second movement. There's like a really beautiful cello moment that we just have a soft roll in. There's probably what else am I thinking of? Favorite timpani stuff. I haven't played Mahler 7 yet, but I'm sure that would be a real big party. We were supposed to play Mahler 2 before the COVID happened. That would be amazing to do that with another good timpanist playing, with double sets of drums and stuff. All the big like Strauss stuff is my favorite. Like all of that like emo, like teenage drama, like romantic music is very much like fun to play timpani wise, because everybody's just going nuts in the high drama moments, and then like the sentimental moments. It can be really really like goosebumpy, I guess is a word to describe it.
I just wanted to add one other. This is one that most people don't know, I think, but the William Schumann New England Triptych, the first movement especially, it starts with the timpani solo, and there's this really loud, raucous part, sort of extended timpani solo later. That's one of the ones that I think more people should know.
Yeah, it's so frequent. Like, I mean, if you look at like an orchestral list, what's funny is if you look at a percussion list, like William Schumann is so popular, but no orchestra plays that music. I mean, maybe New England Triptych is the most popular, but like he's done so much rep that is popular in auditions, but nowhere else.
Yeah, it's with the Academic Festival Overture. It's such a cool. Check that one out.
Nerding out here. Anyway, we're going to dedicate attention now to our younger listeners who follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much for being there. And we have a question from DJ Orson Beats with a Z. How do you balance timpani practice with all the xylophone rags that you do?
Well, timpani is about like career goals and like long-term success, and xylophone is about like, what am I going to do to make $1 today? Which like, it's just like, I do have the benefit of having a pretty good long-term memory, and a lot of the rags that I play are kind of very much entrenched in that. With COVID, I did learn a bunch of new ones, which I am learning that I did not memorize correctly in some forms on the street this week. But really, it's like that's a fun project, and Timpani, like when an audition comes up, which is like usually my high activity season, it's all about learning the rep, but then also like constantly being self-aware and like recording. It's just like a huge mock audition fest in my apartment, which a fun fact for all of you listeners and readers of the podcast, I have set a timpani in a studio apartment that I live in a building with all musicians, thank God, but they deserve all of my money when I become successful after enduring all of my audition prep over the coming years.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Studio apartment. In a studio apartment.
apartment.
So do you sleep right under them?
Basically,
Basically.
that's generally the vibe. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. You've got what it takes. If you're not successful and you can't buy that whole building in 10 years, I don't know what's going to happen of this world. So
We had Chris Deviney on the podcast recently. We actually really haven't talked too much about auditions, but Chris Deviney talked about when he worked at Steve Weiss Music. Steve Weiss had this Chris's wall of failures, and every audition he took that he didn't win was written on the wall. Do you keep track like that? Does that keep you inspired that you came that close or something like that?
The when I do well, I feel better, but like listing like the number of auditions as time goes on, I'm like, oh God, like, am I learning anything from the slew of, because sometimes you just have a slew of like not getting cut altogether. When I first moved to Spokane, like I didn't have access to timpani, so that was a huge problem, and like I was like, why am I not advancing? Like, duh, you don't have anywhere to practice. Like, so you had those like lulls sometimes, but yeah, sometimes it can be encouraging to like at least have some consistent like small successes and keeping track of those and what you can do better. Because I mean, really, you only if you only have 2 practical applications of this kind of test per year, like it can be really difficult to gain momentum. As I'm sure if anybody out there is auditioning, listening to this, relatable content here.
Well, Meagan, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a wonderful hour, and we look forward to seeing everyone on episode 252.